Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
I booked the Airbnb on a whim. It was cheap, secluded, and exactly what I needed for a weekend away. The pictures showed a small cabin nestled in the woods with a cozy interior and a fire pit outside. It had stellar reviews. People raved about the peacefulness, the crisp mountain air, the feeling of being completely alone. That was what I wanted. The host, Alan, messaged me a few hours after I booked. Looking forward to hosting you this weekend. Just a heads up, cell service is spotty up there, but there's a landline in case of emergencies. Enjoy your stay. I arrived late Friday evening. The sun was setting as I pulled up the gravel driveway, the trees closing in around me. The cabin was exactly as advertised, small, rustic, and eerily quiet. There was no Wi-Fi, but I had downloaded some movies beforehand, so I wasn't too concerned. Inside, everything was neat and in place. A guest book sat on the kitchen table, filled with notes from past visitors. Most said the same thing. Beautiful spot, so peaceful. One entry from a few weeks prior caught my eye. Loved it here, but I swear I heard something moving around outside at night. Probably just a deer, but it freaked me out. Still, 5 stars. I chuckled, shaking off the unease creeping in. The woods could be unsettling at night, but I wasn't easily spooked. I spent the evening watching a movie, drinking wine, and enjoying the solitude. By midnight, I was ready for bed. The silence outside was thick, almost pressing against the cabin walls. As I lay in bed, I noticed something odd, the occasional creak of the floorboards. Not loud, just subtle shifts like the house was breathing. Settling noises, I told myself. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound outside. A soft, deliberate crunch of gravel. My heart pounded. I reached for my phone. No signal. Holding my breath, I listened. Silence. Then another crunch. Closer. I forced myself out of bed, creeping to the window. The porch light barely illuminated the front steps, but I could make out the shape of a person standing just beyond the light's reach. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. I considered turning on more lights, making my presence known. Instead, I grabbed the landline phone from the wall and dialed the host's number. It rang once, then stopped. A voice low and flat came through the receiver. "Why did you call me?" My stomach dropped. "Someone's outside," I whispered. Silence. Then I know. A click. I stared at the phone, my pulse hammering. The person outside shifted, taking a slow step forward. I backed away from the window. I needed to leave, now. Grabbing my keys, I crept toward the door, barely breathing. I peeked through the peephole, nothing. The porch was empty. Had they left? I hesitated, then yanked the door open and ran to my car. As soon as I hit the unlock button, the headlights illuminated the driveway. That's when I saw them. Not one person, but several, standing just beyond the tree line, their faces obscured by the darkness. Watching, waiting. I didn't think. I jumped in the car, locked the doors, and tore down the gravel driveway. The figures didn't follow. They just stood there, still as statues, disappearing into the blackness as I sped away. I drove for miles until I reached town, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. When I finally got service, I checked the Airbnb listing. It was gone, completely removed. No trace of it ever existing. I called the police, but without an address or listing, there was nothing they could do. It was as if the place had never been there at all. But I know what I saw, and I know that somewhere deep in those woods, they're still there, watching, waiting for the next guest.
Story number 2.
It started as a dream getaway. Leah and her boyfriend Mark had been saving up for months, eager to escape the chaos of the city. They found the perfect Airbnb, a secluded cabin nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. The listing promised total privacy and a true off-the-grid experience. It had glowing reviews, each one raving about how peaceful and untouched the location was. It was exactly what they wanted. They arrived just before sunset, winding up a narrow dirt road for what felt like miles before finally reaching the cabin. It was rustic but charming, with an old-world feel. Wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and large windows that looked out onto the dense forest. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service, and the only sign of civilization was a landline phone mounted on the kitchen wall. A note beside it read, "For emergencies only, spotty service." As they unpacked, Mark noticed something off. The front door had 2 sets of locks, one standard deadbolt and another that looked heavy-duty industrial. The windows had thick wooden shutters with iron latches, the kind meant to seal a place shut. He joked about it, calling it some serious doomsday prepper energy, but Leah felt uneasy. The first night was peaceful. They made dinner, drank wine, and sat by the fireplace, listening to the distant sounds of the woods. It wasn't until they went to bed that the unease crept in. Leah woke up around 3 a.m., disoriented. The room was pitch black, but something felt wrong. The air was thick, suffocating. It took her a moment to realize she wasn't breathing alone. A slow, shallow inhale, then another. Not hers, not Mark's. She froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. The sound was coming from the corner of the room, steady, measured breathing, as if someone was standing there, watching. She fumbled for her phone, but of course, there was no signal. She whispered Mark's name, shaking him awake. He grumbled and turned over, but by the time he was fully alert, the sound was gone. The next morning, Leah brushed it off as a half-dream, a trick of the mind. They spent the day hiking, exploring the area. By the time they returned, the sky was darkening, and an unsettling silence had settled over the woods. No birds, no rustling leaves, just nothing. Inside, Leah went to shower while Mark built a fire. When she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, she caught a glimpse of something in the bedroom mirror. A figure, a man, standing in the reflection. She spun around, heart slamming against her ribs, but the room was empty. Just the neatly made bed, their suitcases, and the half-open closet. She told herself she was being paranoid. That night, the breathing returned. This time, Mark heard it too, a slow, deliberate inhalation. Then silence. Leah reached for the bedside lamp. The moment the light clicked on, the sound stopped. The room was empty. They barely slept, taking turns keeping watch. The next morning, they decided to cut their trip short. As Mark packed the car, Leah went inside to grab their last bags. She paused in the kitchen, her gaze drifting to the landline phone on the wall. For emergencies only. Her gut told her to pick it up. Maybe, just maybe it worked. She pressed the receiver to her ear. Silence. Then, a breath. Not hers, not Mark, not Ed Air. Someone breathing slow and steady on the other end. She slammed the phone down and bolted for the door. They sped down the dirt road, adrenaline surging through their veins. When they finally reached a town with cell service, Leah called the Airbnb host, demanding to know if anyone else had a key to the cabin. The host hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, "You need to leave a review." "What?" "Leave a review," he repeated. "I can't say more than that, but people need to know." Leah never wrote the review, but months later she checked the listing. It was gone, completely wiped, and in its place was a new listing. Different cabin, different photos, same host. And the most recent review, a single cryptic sentence: "Don't ignore the breathing."
Story number 3.
It was supposed to be a quick weekend trip to visit some friends in a quiet coastal town. Sarah and her roommate Lucy had booked a charming little Airbnb right on the edge of the beach. The listing described the place as cozy, vintage, with a view of the ocean, and had glowing reviews from past guests. Sarah had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. They arrived in the late afternoon, the sky a mix of pale orange and purple. The house was just as advertised, small but beautiful, with a wraparound porch, a hammock, and an old lighthouse in the distance. The host, a woman named Margaret, greeted them warmly, showing them around the house. She mentioned that the previous guests had just checked out and there were no issues. As Margaret left, Sarah and Lucy unpacked. The air smelled of salt water and old pine. It was quiet, eerily quiet. That night, they decided to take a walk along the beach. The moonlight glimmered across the waves, and the sound of the ocean filled the air. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. As they walked, Sarah noticed something strange. There were dozens of old, weather-beaten buoys scattered across the sand, half buried, with long ropes trailing behind them like forgotten ghosts. "What are these doing here?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Lucy replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels off." They turned back toward the house. And as they did, Sarah thought she saw something or someone standing by the window, watching them. She froze for a moment, heart pounding. But when she turned to Lucy to point it out, the window was empty. Back inside the house, the unease lingered. They ate dinner, watched a few episodes of a show, and eventually went to bed. but neither of them could shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Around 2 a.m., Sarah woke to a strange sound, a soft tapping on the window. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then it came again, steady and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. She turned to Lucy, who was still sleeping, her back to Sarah. Hesitantly, Sarah slid out of bed and approached the window. She pulled back the curtain, but all she saw was the dark, empty beach. Tap, tap, tap. She stumbled back, her heart racing. The tapping was louder now, almost rhythmic, as if someone or something was out there, waiting for her to look. Sarah didn't know what to do. She grabbed her phone to text Lucy, but paused when she noticed something on the screen. A new message from an unknown number. Don't look out the window. It was sent just seconds ago. Her blood ran cold. She opened the text, but there was no name attached, just that chilling message. She texted back, "Who is this?" But the message wouldn't send. The signal was gone. The tapping started again, louder this time. Without thinking, Sarah bolted for the door. She rushed outside, looking for something, anything, that would make sense of the terror bubbling in her chest. On the beach just past the line of buoys, she saw a figure standing in the moonlight. It was tall, thin, and draped in tattered clothes that fluttered like a cloak in the wind. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The figure raised a hand, slowly pointing toward the lighthouse. Then it faded into the shadows. Sarah didn't wait to see more. She ran back inside the house and locked all the doors. When Lucy woke up, Sarah was sitting in a corner of the room, staring at the wall. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "We need to leave," Sarah whispered. Lucy sat up, alarmed. "What's going on?" Sarah didn't answer. She just pulled Lucy out of bed and grabbed their things, rushing to the car. As they drove away, Sarah glanced back one last time. The lighthouse stood tall in the distance, its light sweeping over the empty beach. But there was something else now, a silhouette, standing in the middle of the shore, facing the house. The figure was no longer standing alone. There were more. Dozens of them, all watching, waiting. Sarah and Lucy never went back. But months later, the Airbnb listing reappeared. Only this time, it was labeled with a new warning. Please do not disturb the spirits of the beach.